Welcome to the debate. Our core discussion today really tackles one of the biggest questions, doesn't it? It's about whether the universe, based on what science tells us, rationally forces us to consider an intentional, transcendent creator. You know, the evidence from cosmic origins, the Big Bang, and the incredible precision of physical laws, well, it creates a real tension. I'll be arguing that yes, the weight of causality and this apparent design points strongly towards an ultimate, intentional source for reality.
Right, and I'll be taking the other side. While I absolutely agree that the cosmology and the fine-tuning are deeply fascinating subjects, I don't think they necessitate a divine answer. My position is that naturalistic explanations, even some that are still, shall we say, developing, are sufficient. And importantly, I think they're ultimately more parsimonious, philosophically speaking, than invoking a supernatural entity to explain what might just be a limit of our current understanding of physics.
Okay, so let's start where physics itself seems to start, the beginning. The argument from causality, often framed as the Kalam cosmological argument, it really leans on the strong scientific consensus, from Big Bang cosmology and thermodynamics, that the universe did have a beginning, a finite point in the past. The premise is simple. If something begins to exist, it logically needs a cause. Now, since the universe includes all of space, time, and matter, its cause must logically exist outside of space, time, and matter. By definition, this points to a first cause that's timeless, immaterial, and uncaused itself, what philosophers call a necessary being. This seems, to me, the only way to avoid an absurd infinite regress of causes.
Okay. My core objection, though, lies in applying that causal rule. We need to be really careful distinguishing causality within the universe from causality for the universe itself. That rule, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, it's an observation derived entirely from how things work inside our contingent reality. Can we really just assume it applies at the absolute origin point where space and time themselves supposedly popped into existence? And quantum mechanics throws a wrench in this, doesn't it? At the most fundamental level we can probe, classical causality seems, well, fuzzy. We see things like quantum fluctuations, virtual particles appearing seemingly without a direct classical cause. If causality is an absolute at the micro scale, how can we be so certain it's an ironclad rule for the universe's very beginning?
Well, I think we need to differentiate here between material cause and what we might call efficient cause. Quantum fluctuations, as I understand them, describe activity within existing quantum fields, within spacetime. It's something emerging from something, some pre-existing energy or field structure, not something from absolute nothing. The Big Bang singularity, however, that represents a true boundary, an absolute starting point. And that boundary seems to demand an ultimate explanation that isn't just more physics. But okay, let's bracket the origin for a moment and look at the structure of what actually emerged. This gets us to the argument from design or fine-tuning.
Okay, if we, let's say, agree that the absolute origin point is tricky for any view, then yeah, the structure, the fine-tuning, has to do a lot of explanatory work.
Exactly. And it's quite something. Consider the physical constants. Gravity, the electromagnetic force relative to gravity, the strong and weak nuclear forces, and the cosmological constant, that value determining the energy density of space itself. It's tuned with a precision that's almost impossible to grasp. If it were off by, 1 part in 10 to the power of 120, the universe would have either instantly collapsed or expanded so fast that no stars, no galaxies, not even atoms could form. This isn't just improbable, the word improbable barely does its justice. To say that level of specificity is just a cosmic accident, pure luck, that feels like giving up on explanation. Intentional design, on the other hand, offers a coherent reason for why things are so precisely right.
That description of the improbability is, it's powerful, but we have to resist the urge to immediately jump from highly improbable to designed. This is where the weak anthropic principle comes in, isn't it? We are observers. Therefore, we can only observe a universe whose constants allow observers like us to exist. If the cosmological constant was different, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. The conditions are necessary for us, the observers, but that doesn't automatically prove they were set up for us. You're sort of implicitly assuming that our kind of life, carbon-based, water-dependent, is the cosmic goal. But that might just be an artifact of our own existence, an observational selection effect, as they say.
But the anthropic principle, while it explains why we observe these conditions, it doesn't actually explain the underlying probability of such a life-permitting universe existing in the first place. It doesn't address why the constants fell into this incredibly narrow life-permitting zone at all. So it pushes us back, I think, to the question of necessity. Something seems unlikely to come from absolute nothing, and the sheer ordered complexity we see suggests intention. The Big Bang points to a contingent universe, one that didn't have to exist, and that contingency seems to require a ground, a necessary being outside of it all.
Okay, but I really have to push back hard on this necessary being concept, because isn't there a logical problem here, sometimes called special pleading? You argue everything contingent needs a cause, and the universe is contingent because it began. Fine. But then God, the necessary being, is just exempted from this rule? If this necessary being can just be without a cause, why can't the fundamental laws of physics themselves, or perhaps the underlying reality from which our universe emerged, be the uncaused necessary thing? Why posit a mind?
Well, the distinction I'd draw is between a reality like our universe, which is clearly composite, finite, showing change, having a start point, and a necessary being, which is typically defined in philosophy as simple, non-composite, timeless, the ultimate ground of contingency. If the necessary being itself were complex or had parts, you could rightly ask what caused those parts to come together. But by defining it as fundamentally simple and outside space-time, asking who caused God becomes a kind of category mistake, like asking, what's north of the North Pole. Your view, though, suggesting the physical laws are necessary, it doesn't really explain why those laws take the incredibly specific, fine-tuned form that they do.
And that brings us squarely to parsimony, Occam's razor, especially regarding fine-tuning. It feels like you're trying to solve one mystery, the universe's low probability, by introducing an arguably greater mystery, a conscious, infinitely complex designer. Who designed the designer? Who fine-tuned God's mind? It seems like it just kicks the problem upstairs, doesn't it?
I see Occam's razor cutting the other way, actually. A necessary being, philosophically defined as simple and ultimate, is arguably the simplest explanation for why there's anything contingent at all. It's one single, unifying principle. The main naturalistic alternative you might point to, like the multiverse theory, well, that seems ontologically extravagant.
Is it, though? The multiverse, whether via cosmic inflation, string theory landscapes, or maybe cyclical models, it offers a naturalistic framework where, given enough tries, a universe with our specific constants becomes statistically likely, maybe even inevitable. Instead of one infinitely complex mind, it posits potentially infinite but fundamentally simpler physical processes repeating. That statistical outcome could be seen as more parsimonious than a supernatural intelligence.
I'm not sure that holds up. The multiverse is, let's be honest, highly speculative at this point. There's no direct observational evidence. It's not currently testable. It feels like inventing an infinite number of unseen realities just to avoid the implication of design in the one reality we can see. And besides, doesn't the multiverse itself require some kind of universe-generating mechanism? Some meta-laws governing the production of these universes? So who or what fine-tuned that mechanism? You haven't really gotten rid of fine-tuning. You've just shifted it to a higher, unobservable level.
But our commitment, scientifically, is to seek explanations within the realm of the observable or at least the potentially testable. Even if the multiverse is speculative now, it's still framed as a physical hypothesis, unlike a supernatural designer, which seems inherently untestable by definition. And this really leads to my final point, which is about relying on gaps. It seems both arguments, the origin and the fine-tuning, rely heavily on gaps in our current scientific understanding.
I wouldn't call it filling a gap. I'd call it addressing a fundamental philosophical boundary and a genuine probability crisis.
But look at the history. Think about lightning, disease, planetary motion. These were all once explained by invoking the divine,
And in every case, scientific progress eventually filled that gap with natural explanations. Isn't saying God did it for the universe's origin or its constants just another argument from ignorance? Basically saying, we don't know yet, so it must be God. Shouldn't we expect that future physics, maybe quantum gravity, maybe string theory, will eventually provide a natural account?
I absolutely respect the progress of science, but I think cosmology has given us something different here. Not just a temporary gap, but a fundamental boundary. The Big Bang isn't just something we don't understand yet. It appears to be the actual beginning of physical reality as we know it. That definitive starting point, combined with the incredibly precise structure we observe, it suggests that waiting for an answer purely within physics might be misguided because physics itself seems to have begun at that boundary. The cumulative case origin plus fine-tuning seems to point towards a necessary explanation beyond the physical. And, if we only rely on natural selection, how do we even ground the reliability of the rational laws of nature that allow us to do science in the first place?
Well, reliability emerges because it works, doesn't it? The laws we observe, the cognitive tools we have, they're reliable because they successfully model the system we're part of, the system that natural selection shaped us to perceive and interact with. No divine guarantee needed, just functional success. So to wrap up my side, the cumulative case presents profound questions, yes, but it doesn't demonstrate the necessity of a creator. Invoking the divine introduces an explanatory category, the supernatural that is fundamentally untestable, and arguably raises more difficult questions about its own nature and origin.
And yet I have to ask which conclusion feels more intellectually coherent? That this universe, with its intricate order and the very laws of logic themselves, somehow sprang into existence uncaused from literally nothing? Or that the order we see reflects an ultimate intelligent source that provides the necessary foundation for all contingent reality?
And I'd counter, which is more parsimonious, positing potentially infinite but relatively simple physical universes operating under potentially discoverable laws, or positing one infinitely complex, utterly unique, uncaused mind to explain the single universe we happen to inhabit?
And I suppose that's where this particular exchange must rest for now. My view remains that the convergence of evidence from the cosmic beginning to the razor-sharp fine-tuning builds a strong cumulative case. Positing God offers, I believe, a coherent and unifying explanation that elegantly addresses the deep problems of infinite regress and radical improbability that purely naturalistic accounts struggle with, especially concerning ultimate origins.
And my position holds firm that naturalistic explanations, while perhaps still developing, are sufficient and methodologically preferable. They keep us grounded in the search for testable mechanisms. While the arguments we've discussed certainly highlight profound philosophical territory, they don't, in my view, make theism the most rational or unavoidable conclusion for explaining our physical universe. Resisting the temptation to fill knowledge gaps with the divine remains, I think, the wiser path.
Indeed. And we've really only scratched the surface today. Focusing just on cosmology and design, there are, of course, many other dimensions to this enduring debate.
Absolutely. Plenty more in the source material for us and for listeners to grapple with.